That's Nick.
And that's Joseph, and today we're here to talk about Selah and The Spades, which will be available on digital on demand, courtesy of Amazon Studios, April 17th, 2020. Premiered at the 2019 Sundance Film Festival in the Next section. It is the directorial debut of Tayarisha Poe.
Was she like a producer or something before?
She did some short work.
Oh, okay. So describe the story.
It's set in a high-end Pennsylvania boarding school known as Haldwell, and a group of 5 different groups or factions of students basically run the world there, and each of them has a different task. The most powerful of these factions are the Spades, run by Selah, played by Lovie Simone. And a new girl has come to school named Paloma, and she decides to groom her to be her next in line because it's Selah's senior year, and she will need to leave behind her legacy. And also the Spades are responsible for distributing drugs.
And alcohol.
And alcohol to the student body. That's what they're responsible for.
Yep. I haven't seen the Harry Potter movies, but isn't like in that school there are different groups?
Yeah, I think that's a common YA trope. Like certainly the Divergent series also has delineations of such factions.
Okay, haven't seen those either. Mm-hmm. So let's start with what we liked about the film. Mm-hmm. I like some of the mood. There are several scenes. There are like 3 party scenes. Mm-hmm. 2 party scenes.
2, I think.
Well, and then the prom.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I like the ambiance of that. There's also a scene where they pull a prank, where they like fill a stairwell with glasses of like colored liquid. I thought that looked really cool. So there's some cool visuals.
Sure.
I think the lead actor who plays Selah,
Lovie Simone,
who's from Greenleaf, which I love Greenleaf.
Yes.
She's very good at playing like a bitchy teenager.
Although it is basically the same as her role.
It's the same as Greenleaf, but she does a good job with that. What else did you appreciate about this story?
I liked some of the subtext of what was going on. I saw a lot of attempts to build some subtext. Like it opens with a quote from Ozma of Oz, which, L. Frank Baum's Wizard of Oz series was a favorite of mine as a kid. I haven't read it since I was a child. And also Gina Torres, the ex-wife of Lawrence Fishburne, plays Selah's mother.
Oh, that's her.
Yeah.
Okay.
And she it feels kind of clunky in the dialogue, but again, it lays the groundwork for some subtext, a fable about a scorpion and a frog, and how it's in the scorpion's nature to sting, basically. And to me, that was we're supposed to clue in on Selah and Paloma, as that's them. And I like all those little bits. And if you go back to some portions of the dialogue, that also works well with this too, because like Paloma's listening to a shuffle iPod, and Selah's like, "What? Doesn't it drive you crazy? You can't pick the next song." And she's like, "Well, it's always the right song playing," to differentiate between their personalities, but also to underscore that this is a film about control and limitations of control. Yes, Janet Jackson.
Janet Jackson. I can't not say it. So I agree with your references. I think they were too ambitious for what the end result is.
I think so too.
So let's just describe. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I also wanted to add, because there's also a very leading moment of dialogue where Selah's basically telling Paloma to choose what kind of cog she is in the system, to choose what kind of control you have. So
the film opens with Selah like sitting in one of those bamboo chairs that you would take portraits of when you were a kid in the 80s, like thinking about her legacy and how it's her senior year and she needs to find someone to pass it along to. And then we find the leaders of the 5 factions sitting in some old field at a table, kind of discussing,
screaming at one another. Yeah,
which was a clunky scene. And then we move on to Paloma being introduced as a new student.
So played by Celeste O'Connor, who can be seen, I guess, now next year in the new Ghostbusters film.
Nice.
and I do like Jesse Williams. He didn't have much to do in this as the headmaster. I think you had a...
Jesse looked like he had 3 days free, and they cut him a check, and he showed up. He's not clean shaven. He looks so out of place. But the crux of the issue is Selah and her faction, the Spades, are kind of the leaders. Mm-hmm. They distribute drugs and alcohol from a trunk that's like this big, that has all these colorful... Oh, there's so many issues I had. From the trunk to the scope of like the Spades' control, because we really don't understand each faction's like role in the school.
I mean, they are explained, but we don't really see that in operation.
No, so the magnitude of what they're doing, especially in relation to this little bitty trunk that they're dealing drugs and alcohol from, like the impact that has not only on the student body, but on Selah and her brother.
Jharrel Jerome,
who I like,
who's in Moonlight.
Yeah, I like him.
Oh, and Ava DuVernay is When They See Us.
I just don't, the gravity of what they're doing, because it sounds like, on paper, what they're doing is pretty badass and pretty,
I mean, it reminds you of a lot of things like Spike Lee's School Days, or even there's a certain ambience you could say that would relate it to Picnic at Hanging Rock even, or Justin Simeon's Dear White People, or Cruel Intentions, Jawbreaker, Heathers.
Okay, all those references make sense, except this film has no sex, no violence, no...
Which leads me to, I had kind of the exact same problems with this film as I did with Rian Johnson's Brick from 2005, which is basically Dashiell Hammett set in a high school with Joseph Gordon-Levitt trying to unravel this mystery, and it just doesn't work because it's high school. The stakes just aren't high enough.
Well, so to finish the story, the bulk of the story is Paloma being groomed by Selah, mm-hmm. and then there's that point where it switches, mm-hmm. and Paloma realizes like she's in control. She's going to because Jesse Williams, who plays like the principal or administrator of the school, the headmaster, he decides to cancel prom because he finds out that these kids are like up to no good, which amounts to him finding like a bottle of alcohol at a mm-hmm. party they weren't supposed to have. So prom's canceled. Paloma decides that she's going to throw a prom, and she organizes all the groups to come together to throw this prom. And it's at that point when Selah realizes she created a monster and decides to take her out. So an underlying plot line is that Selah is so she had a previous like underling who everyone thinks she's responsible for killing, but not directly killing, just giving her drugs that caused her to get into a car accident, right?
Which also relates to the school play this term is Macbeth, and Macbeth's machinations for killing all these people on his ascension to power.
Okay, there are some good ideas that do make sense, but they're not executed well, because at the end, Selah decides that she's going to drug Paloma in a scene that is laughable because she has like a mini shot of what looks like Jack Daniels, and Selah not discreetly dumps 2 pills, like tablets, into the shot glass, which you can see them not dissolved, gives them to Paloma, she drinks it, and then afterwards Selah asks her brother like, what did I give her? And the reaction they both have is like, they gave this bitch cyanide, she's gonna die. But really she just seems drunk, mm-hmm. not even like blackout drunk, just drunk. And Paloma starts running like Forrest Gump, mm-hmm. and then it's dark, so she hits like a fence and it looks like she's gonna fall off a cliff, but she's just dangling. Selah and her brother save her, and the 3 of them kind of walk off into the distance, and that's the end of the film. Mm-hmm. So a lot can be assumed by what happens next. I just have so many issues with
how she gets her supply.
Well, but I mean, overall, like, what is the message? Like, because to me, Selah seems like an intelligent, beautiful, young black woman who has so much potential. She comes from what appears to be an upper middle class background. Mm-hmm. The world is her oyster. And like her mom says, that reference you made about her kind of like chopping off her nose to spite her face kind of thing. I understand that, but I also don't get her motivation. I don't understand what she thinks her legacy is.
Well, yeah, we were discussing that, like legacy, like as she's gonna come back as an alum to talk about the Spades.
To talk about who's selling drugs.
There will be no acknowledgement. Yeah, And also where she gets her, and that's why this feels like a YA franchise started, but denuded of the sci-fi tropes that allow for our suspension of disbelief. Because I'm not that old where I don't remember high school and people dealing drugs and things that they did to do that, and it doesn't look like this.
No, because it doesn't feel like this movie wasn't like bad enough. It wasn't bad as in the kids aren't like as sinister.
Oh yeah, the lack of kind of sexuality is.
Yeah, they're not as depraved and sinister as they should have been. And I was in high school 25 years ago. And these kids were way worse back then. Yeah. So I just don't understand how she's like the ringleader of this underbelly of this cartel. And it's like oh my God. There are two scenes where two characters were beaten up. We don't see them getting beaten up, but they return cut and bruised. And Selah's brother comes back, which made me laugh out loud. It looks like he got scratched. So like a couple of people with like acrylic nails beat him up. It just like... I don't understand the danger. I don't understand what is happening.
There isn't a real tension. And when I bring up Picnic at Hanging Rock, it's like there's this menace that kind of hangs over it, but then it's so ambiguous that it doesn't. I don't want to completely shit on this film. I think that it's a good, like the idea is good, and I think that I'm assuming when anyone makes a film, they're hoping that maybe it'll be like a franchise and multiple installments. I think this film would have worked better as maybe like a TV series. I could definitely see it being like a Netflix. That or cutting out it doesn't really matter about 4 other factions.
Or I didn't need all those factions. It could have just been Selah's the HBIC of the school and she's up to no good and and there's this other girl who's coming and is going to take her place and Selah's arrogance won't let her just let it go because she's moving on to bigger and better things. That would have been the better story for a feature film.
Because the scenes I absolutely loathed are when the heads of these factions are arguing around that table out in the wild. Oh God! Like the girl that plays Bobby, like Anna Mulvoy.
Not to shit on her, but her dialogue and acting was not good.
Oh, it's so shrill. Oh,
there's a scene where she's sitting, like I think before a theater performance, and she has 2 girls like putting on her makeup, which amounts to one girl brushing the same area and another combing the same ends of her hair. And then she kind of like, to dismiss them, does this thing like she's the godfather. It's just so extra, but these bitches aren't doing anything.
Well, right, and I also
they're not running shit.
The thing about high school students is that they're a lot more petty and cruel, I think.
Than this. Actual high school students are way worse than these kids.
And potentially violent.
There's a scene where Selah is asking Paloma about her sort of sexual activity, and I for sure assumed that like Selah's gonna set her up and get her doing something sexual on tape and distribute it to the school. Nope.
And also, Paloma really doesn't have much to do. There's not really much development. She does have some of a character arc, but there's really not much development. I really don't have a sense of Paloma.
No. I was excited to see this film because seeing a primarily, like a cast made primarily people of color was like appealing, and I do like the actor from Greenleaf. I didn't know Jesse Williams was in it.
I didn't either until he popped up.
I mean, I like him, but he didn't do anything. I would give this film 2 out of 5 stars.
I think that's fair. I think it's brimming with interesting ideas. It's just that it wasn't ultimately an enjoyable experience.
No. All right, bye.
Bye.